now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Woloshyn Podcast. Brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's fashion. Tom's Place will suit you. And now, here's Ted.
Well, hello, everybody. Once again, welcome to the Ted Woloshyn Podcast. I be he. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. You know, in everyone's life, pretty much everyone's life at one point or another, I'm talking your professional life now, whether it be at the beginning of your professional career, sometime in the middle, or even toward the end of it, you will face rejection. Everybody has. Folks from Monty Python, Jim Carrey, Josh Allen, Mariska Hargitay, and more. And because of that rejection, our good friends at the Apostrophe Podcast Company have developed a fabulous podcast. In fact, it began 6 years ago, but it's also now available on CBC Radio this summer, titled, and you'll love this, We Regret to Inform You, the Rejection Podcast. You'll be able to catch it CBC Radio 1 and Sirius at 11:30 a.m. on Wednesday, Friday 4 p.m. on Sirius, and Sunday 7 p.m. on CBC Radio 1 and Sirius. The hosts are Sidney O'Reilly and Terry O'Reilly, and they join me now. Congratulations, by the way, for year number 6, and congratulations for your now presence on CBC. And we should mention on Sirius Radio as well. I mean, you're virtually everywhere. You can't get away from you. I was thinking to myself, after listening to a number of the episodes, that I was thinking to myself, it dawned on me like 2 days ago. I thought, is there an upcoming episode here for Mr. Colbert?
Yeah, we read that news last night.
That's kind of a different, we regret to inform you. That's kind of like you're right at the top of the game. You're the number one late show host, and now you're gone.
Some of our shows, most of our shows are somebody, the story of somebody struggling to make it. Then a few of our shows are people that are mid-career and get rejected and have to kind of start all over again. So he could qualify for that.
And I wonder, I think to myself, we've all faced rejection at one point or another, whether it be rejection in post-secondary, you're applying for college or university or your first job. But it's I don't know what's more difficult, the initial rejection or being rejected halfway through your career and thinking, wait a minute, it's not supposed to end yet. I'm supposed to be on a climb. Why is this plateau? Why am I plateauing here? What do you think is more difficult?
Well, it's hard to say which one's more difficult. I think what you just described can be particularly devastating because we all imagine this ascension, right? This very clean upward trajectory. So I think it can be devastating to learn that success is not always linear, right? It's more of a squiggly line oftentimes than that straight, clean line. And we've had a number of episodes where that's the case. We were just talking about the screenwriter J.F. Lawton, who, of course, wrote Pretty Woman. He faced quite a bit of rejection pre-Pretty Woman. Of course, it comes out and it's this huge success. But afterward, he couldn't get another script through the studio process. So
Crazy.
It's not always a straight line. Oftentimes it's not. And I think a big part of our show in some ways is preparing people for that. It's not always perfect.
I recall somebody saying once in discussion, there was a group of people discussing what hit wonders. And somebody said, well, one hit wonder, I mean, what is that? What kind of career is that? And somebody said, well, have you had one? Have you had a hit? And they said, no, I haven't. Well, so you know what I mean? If you're a one-hit wonder, that's already a major accomplishment that most people will never see. So if you don't accomplish anything anywhere near that afterwards, you shouldn't feel bad about it. You should still think, well, wow, I got this one-hit wonder.
Yeah. And one-hit wonders, they're usually massive hits, those one hits. So those can sustain you for a number of years, I would say.
Yeah. It's true that rejection is always disappointing. It's depressing, it's embarrassing, and sometimes defeating. But when it isn't defeating, when you can look at it and say to yourself, the best success I've found is when somebody stares you right in the eye and says, no, you can't do this. You're not made for this. You're the wrong color to be in the ballet, to quote from one of your episodes. You're the wrong gender, whatever it may be. And then you say, well, you know what? 2 words for you, and I'm coming back bigger and stronger.
Totally.
And
It was
so,
in my own life, Ted, when I was starting out. Two quick things about rejecting. When I got out of Ryerson, I studied radio and TV there. I wanted to be an advertising copywriter. That's the thing I just dreamed of being an ad writer. I sent out 60 resumes to 60 advertising agencies across the country and got back 61 rejection letters. One place rejected me twice. When I eventually did land a job at a small agency, the creative director there really hated my work. He just hated my work. I don't even know why he hired me. When I resigned, he said to me, this is getting back to your point. He said, what are you going to do now? I said, this was in Burlington. I said, I'm going to go back to Toronto and try and get a job at a big advertising agency. And he said to me, you're going to end up selling shoes. You're not good enough. And you know what? That fueled me. I thought, I'll show you. So,
sometimes people tell you those kinds of things. I recall when I first started in radio and I was working in Peterborough, it was my second job, and my father said to me, you should really sign up for some courses at Trent University, because the odds of you coming back to Toronto to work at like Chum or one of the big stations, really, the odds are really stacked against you. And you should get like a degree or something so you can come back and teach. And I kind of laughed and I said, yeah, right. Those who can't do, those who can't teach. Is that what you're trying to say? And so, I mean, at first it pissed me off. And at first I thought I was really disappointed in my father saying that. But then it dawned on me later. I said, he's only doing this for my own benefit. He's trying to save me. But it worked as an inspiration for me to say, oh, yeah, watch me.
Mhm. I think that's a theme we see quite a bit in our show, is using rejection as fuel. We see it a lot in our sports episodes, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But I was talking to someone the other day about it, that particular theme, and they asked, how do you know if you can turn that rejection into fuel? Like how do you do that? And I was thinking a little bit about it, and I realized that if you've ever been, growing up and someone has ever said to you, gosh, you're so stubborn, or, if someone says black, you say white, you're a contrarian, you're probably a candidate to use rejection as fuel.
right.
You probably have that innate quality in you where if you hear no, you just get this urge to prove people wrong. And, use that stubborn quality. It's probably been, something people comment on in a negative way your whole life.
I like how you point out it, and this is one of your episodes that people should listen back on. It's December 18th of 2024, where you talk about how the program came to be and various questions that were submitted to you by the listeners. But you talk about the fact that you're going through biographies and autobiographies, and I'm a big fan of biographies and autobiographies. And you're right. Quite often, the person talking about their lives will say, oh, yeah, I got rejected by 4 or 5 different film companies, and I was told this, I was told this. And they move on. They just skim over the rejection and go right to the success story. And you think, wait, there's got to be more to it than that.
Totally. And I think they do that for really good reasons. I think sometimes the rejection it's so far in the rearview mirror that you're not as in touch with maybe how painful it was at the time, or maybe it's shameful and embarrassing, as you said earlier. But yeah, a lot of the time we would read those autobiographies and it would be like, okay, I was in New York. I had 7 roommates in a bachelor apartment. I was working, I was waiting tables. I was going on audition after audition, and life was terrible. Next paragraph. So when I got my first big audition and I landed it, and you're like, hang on, how did you get an agent? How did you get out of that apartment? What did you learn from all those rejections at all those auditions? Like, back up. I think that's our key window for our show right there, is between those 2 paragraphs. What isn't being said?
Yeah.
People would be shocked to hear some of the stories. I mean, I'm a big NFL fan, and reading about Josh Allen, who's arguably if not the best, one of the most popular players in the NFL today. He's the quarterback for the Buffalo Bills, for those of you who don't follow football. Most valuable player last season. And he was rejected how many times? How many letters did he send out? How many tapes did he send out? And everybody said, nah, nah, nah.
Countless. But Josh Allen was so committed. He wrote countless letters to even some of those coaches who had already rejected him. And I always think about his opening line to all those letters, which was just, I want to be your quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
So bold. It's so brave. He was considered small. He wasn't considered fast enough. But, when, another team loses their quarterback, what are you going to remember? It's that letter that came in with that line, that commitment that's so important. sport. It's very brave to put yourself out there that way. And Josh Allen is a great story.
Here's the other thing too, which came out of that story too, Ted, is you have to ask for the job.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people will not literally ask for the job. You know, they'll hope that someone reads between the lines that they're looking for the job, but literally say, I want to work for you. How can we make this happen? Like that is a powerful sentence, right?
I think a lot of people are embarrassed to say something like that because they feel I'm being way too bold, being way too arrogant, and coming across in the wrong fashion. That people are going to look at me and say, who's this snot-nosed kid telling me who he is and what I should be doing?
And if I own a dream that big and people know about it, what if I don't achieve it? And they all knew I wanted it and I didn't get it. I think that's here.
Afraid to say it out loud.
They're afraid to say it out loud.
Yeah. And I love the concept of overnight success, which is a term that I always laugh at because I don't know that even exists, to be quite honest with you. I suppose, if you happen to be walking down the street and somebody says, well, we're looking for somebody to play a small role. It's so rare.
Yeah.
And can you continue after that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, overnight success is really a misnomer. It's just you haven't heard about the struggle. That's all.
You found out overnight. There's 10 years of work behind that.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
Whose idea was it for this show? And when it was pitched, was it originally rejected or accepted?
In Under the Influence, one of my favorite topics or themes, Ted, is when people go against conventional thinking or they really struggled with a product or getting an ad sold within the marketing specifically. And I always found those stories quite fascinating. So I said to Sid one day, do you think we could build a show around this of just focusing on, instead of the success, the rejection? And I'll send it over to Sid. And then Sid thought I could do something with that, right?
Yeah, it was so interesting because actually when we figured out, off that idea, the structure of the show, we realized we were going to end at the point of success. We weren't going to keep going. That is well trodden land. Everybody knows about the success, but the more interesting part is, of course, before that. So we really just sat together, and it was the beginning of our company as well, Apostrophe Podcasts, where we decided to tell more stories and make more podcasts. But this was the first one under our banner, our new banner. And yeah, it was fascinating because I remember thinking at first, I hope we can come up with enough rejection stories to fill a season. We tell about 20 stories per season. And that became the ultimate irony because we are all rejected. We will never run out of stories.
Everybody's got a rejection story.
Yeah, exactly. It would be fascinating and I don't know how you would go about this. This is just something rattling around my mind in the last couple of days, but to speak to some of those people who did reject the actors and writers and talk to them and say, well, what do you think now? What do you think now about turning down The Godfather for a film? And what do you think now about saying that Michael Jordan will never be able to sell a pair of running shoes?
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting.
That is a very interesting thought.
Yeah. The title should be, so how stupid do you think you are now?
Exactly.
The tough part, of course, would be getting one guest, never mind an entire.
Willing to admit that
how
they're
stupid
a
are
big
you?
mistake. Yeah.
What I love about the show, many things that I love about the show, it's not just, it doesn't just deal with individuals who become stars, such as the aforementioned Josh Allen and Jim Carrey's in there. I want to talk about that for a second in a minute, but also a guy by the name of Eddie Goldfarb, who came up with chattering teeth.
The chattering teeth.
That's a generational thing. I don't even know if you were around, Sid, when those things were around. Terry and I certainly remember.
Came out. Well, but that's an enduring toy.
That was a big one for Terry and I think, growing up. The chattering teeth. Talk to me a little bit about that. Share that story. I don't want to give everything away, but just share a little bit of that.
Yeah, that was a great one. I think sometimes I've realized that we have different types of listeners on our show. Some are, in the trenches of their career themselves. I think some are just beginning their careers, say out of college, and some people come because they love a celebrity story. And I wondered if that third category clicked on Eddie Goldfarb, because it might not be a name that they recognize. But I loved that story. Eddie Goldfarb came up with the chattering teeth. He came up with countless toys across the course of his career, but he was constantly rejected. The chattering teeth seemed like a crazy idea for a toy at the time. It didn't have educational value. Like, why were we giving this to children? And he was so
Kids don't need dentures.
They don't need dentures. He was so persistent, and his wife was an incredible champion of his career at the time because, her parents were telling her, you married a toy inventor? At that time it seemed really crazy, and she was supporting him throughout his career. But, he was right. Those chattering teeth really endured. It's a story that I hope people can click on, even if they don't recognize the name.
And that's, if I may, Ted, that story has another ongoing relevant theme we see pop up a lot, which is sometimes you need a champion in your corner. And, we go back to Stephen King. It was his wife, Tabitha, who pulled the manuscript for Carrey out of the garbage can and told him to keep going.
Yeah. And
he wouldn't have done it.
Yeah. And back to Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey's father really nurtured his sort of quirkiness, or as he called it, his weirdness, when I think that could have been snuffed out in the wrong hands, which would go on to, of course, become his signature thing. It's why we watch a Jim Carrey movie. So champions, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a theme. That might be our favorite theme that we come across.
And there's an interesting story as well. Jim Carrey, so many different aspects of his life are quite fascinating. And I saw him at a young age and got to know him as a young. I used to host a syndicated comedy show, and we recorded him on a couple of occasions and did many interviews with him. And here's a guy who achieved massive success, made gazillions of dollars, and then just threw the anchor out of the boat and said, "That's it.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this anymore."
Yep.
Yeah.
I used to go see him too, Ted, at Yuck Yucks when he was, it would be the late 70s. I think he's probably a little younger than me, so he was probably still in his late teens or 20 or something.
And let's talk about, you would know a lot about this given your career, but let's talk about the rejection on stage a comedian has to deal with. It's visceral, and it is not gentle. There's no, we regret to inform you. That line's out the window. We're talking booing, absolutely devastating. Humiliating. You have to have a lot of guts to get back up there.
I think George Carlin said it the best. He said, "This is it, man. Here's my job. Dig me." And that's it, right? And you're the tightrope walker without a net. And the thing about a stand-up comedian versus like a band, you can have a really bad band, but everybody knows when a song finishes, and instinctively you'll do this.
Right.
Nobody laughs instinctively at the end of a joke, because sometimes you don't even know that the joke has ended or they've come to the punchline.
And you're up there all alone regardless.
People fake orgasms and applause, but they don't fake humor.
Humor is so pure, isn't it? Like, I always marvel at critics that go to see a comedy film. The audience laughs for 2 hours, then they come back and write a bad review.
Yeah.
Because, it's clearly working, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I read something recently that said make someone laugh is a misnomer, because you can't really make someone laugh, right? It's
involuntary.
It's involuntary, exactly.
Well, to go back to what you were saying, Terry, about the critics, sometimes I think critics will go to a theater and they'll watch a film and they'll laugh along with the audience, but then they come back and they realize, well, this is kind of a silly film, and if I say it's good, it's gonna belittle me as a critic, of my standing as a critic. What is that all about? If it's funny, it's funny. I don't care if it's a pie in the face or if it's the cleverest line written for Frasier. Funny is funny.
Right.
I know.
Which is why we need a comedy category at the Oscars, which we talk about all the time.
They lump it in with
I know.
It's comedy and
musical
always. And there could be two different.
It's a very different category.
I know. Even when Kevin Kline won the Oscar for A Fish Called Wanda, it was one of the few times a comedic performance has won an Oscar, right?
And Best Picture, was that one a Best Picture?
I don't think it won Best Picture that year. I don't think so.
I wonder how many comedies have.
And I think actors will tell you it's more difficult to do a comedic part than it is to do a dramatic part.
Totally. What's that great line, Ted? Someone said, dying is easy, comedy is hard.
Yeah. And there is no death like death of a comedian on stage.
Yeah, I know.
Because you take it so personally.
Mhm.
You know, it's like you can go out and you can say, well, and the unfortunate thing is, and I've talked to a number of stand-up comedians about this, that there is such a thing as a bad audience. Because you can go out one night and you can do a great set and go and duplicate that set the following night or the same night, an hour and a half later, and bomb because the audience just is not there for whatever reason.
It's like a sequel to a great movie. You know, you have a blockbuster movie, then you hire the same director, same writer, same cast, you do the sequel and it bombs. You think, how can that be? We have the same team.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why so many spin-offs of TV shows just don't make it.
Yeah.
Mariska Hargitay is a fascinating story. I've always had great respect for her as an actor, and she went through a tough time. Part of it had to do with it. A big part of it had to do with the color of her hair. Because it was a Hollywood blonde hair kind of a life world at that point, and she didn't fit in with that.
Yeah, of course. She was, every time she walked into an audition and they recognized her name, of course, her mother famously is the great Jane Mansfield, and they expected a blonde bombshell, and that just wasn't Mariska, you know? She spent her career really having to prove herself in spite of that every single time she walked in, and I think in turn ended up really distancing herself from her late mother as a result to sort of carve out her own lane. But that was really tricky for her. That was really hard, and she of course has had incredible, unheard of television success. She's the highest paid actress on television now, but there were many years where she thought about walking away.
Well, she's the one who's sending out the "we regret to inform you" letters now. All right. And I wonder if the people who because when I was listening to it, I was thinking to myself, well, so how does she approach that? How does she approach rejecting people after having been rejected so many times? Do you think that she has a more capacity? Like, is there more empathy within her than say the average studio head of studio or a director or producer would have?
Who was it, Sid, in one of our stories that doesn't have they can't turn people down. They have to have someone else turn them down. Do you remember who that was? I know Lorne Michaels does that. He can't tell, like when he's auditioning new actors or comedians for Saturday Night Live, he has one of his assistants tell them that they didn't get the job, that he doesn't have the heart for it after all these years. Because he was rejected early in his career too, with after Hart and Lorne and all that early CBC stuff. Couldn't get out either for a long time.
Well, how difficult was it for you running an agency for those many years?
Yeah, I mean, in the advertising business, rejection is such a huge part. And I don't mean career rejection, but your ideas are rejected every day. You have to learn how to bounce back. You have to learn how to present in a boardroom. You really have to learn to run with the rejection, to pivot, because if you can't, you will never survive in advertising. I read a lot of times people say, I just didn't like advertising. I didn't like selling stuff. And I thought, I bet you it's the rejection, really. If I scraped a little bit further into you, it's the rejection that was too tough.
Well, and I think, people say when you're rejected, it's the old adage, at first you don't succeed, try again. But I think the better line to that is from a W.C. Fields film years ago where he said, if at first you don't succeed, try again, then quit. No use making a damn fool of yourself.
Yeah, well, that's a good point too, is when do you stop trying? That's really our whole sentiment with the show is don't stop trying.
I realize that.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people are afraid to even try, afraid of rejection so intensely that they don't even give it a shot. And then I think there's people who, when they hear the first rejection, then just change and say, okay, that doesn't work for me. Whereas if they would have just stuck it out, and we often say you might be 3 no's from a yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we got that question in our last Q&A episode, which was, is there ever a point where someone should give up?
Yeah.
And it was such an interesting question. And the answer is yes, comma, it's probably when you need to pivot.
That's what I was going to say.
And That comes up quite a bit in our stories. It's the adage, write the goal in pen and the path in paper, pencil. And that's exactly what it is you need to be able to be flexible. It's really hard to be flexible when you're in the trenches. But I think Colonel Sanders was a really good, solid example of that because he ran a gas station off a highway for a number of and he, started making his fried chicken for, the truckers that would stop. And that evolved into having a cafe that accompanied his gas station. And it was very, very successful. And he thought, this is going to be my life and career. He was perfectly happy. And then, of course, they rerouted that highway. So the truckers would bypass his restaurant and his gas station. And, if we just said, never give up, keep that gas station going. Of course, there was no business for him anymore. But what he did was pivot. He decided to take his secret recipe of 11 different herbs and spices that he had created over the years for that fried chicken, and he decided to try selling it to restaurants. And famously, he was rejected 1,000 times.
1,000.
He is our record holder over here at the pod.
And he wasn't young either, was he?
He wasn't. This is a late in life rejection story. It's pretty incredible. And that was completely starting over in a way. That was a whole new business. He would lug his vat of oil in the back of his truck to all these restaurants to show them how to make his chicken. And this was not a high-tech machine. There were many explosions of oil that deterred lot of deep fried chaos. Yeah, so I love that story. I think that's a really interesting one to really show you pivoting. I mean, they literally pivoted the road by his restaurant and he had to pivot his dream.
A quick little addendum to that, Ted. When I was starting out in my advertising career in 1981, I was doing work for a bunch of Kentucky Fried Chicken locations in the Burlington, Hamilton area. And the Colonel would drop in because, as you know, he lived in Mississauga back.
That's right. That's right.
And I said, what's the Colonel like? They go, we hate him. I said, what? I said, why do you hate him? He said, because he comes in here, he doesn't like our gravy. He thinks we're cooking the chicken wrong. Like his standards were so high that he would drive all the franchisees crazy. So funny.
And he had a fake cane. He didn't need the cane.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing, think about his whole branding, right? I know. Kentucky kind of, he wasn't even a colonel, right?
Right. Yep.
The little string tie and the white suit and the cane and the goat. Like he was well into branding. He understood it.
Colonel Tom Parker wasn't a colonel either. Did you ever hear that story about Dolly Parton when Colonel Tom Parker, and I love Dolly Parton was approached by Colonel Tom Parker. He said, Elvis would like to record one of your songs. And she says, well, that would be terrific. She says, but the deal is we get half the rights to the song. And she looked at him. She says, no.
She was young then too.
She was young. She was very,
right? She
said no. And she says, sir, please understand something. Just because I'm blonde doesn't mean I'm stupid. And just because you call yourself a colonel, you're not really a colonel. Some words to that effect. She basically just went, and walked away from potential millions of dollars. Of course, she made a gazillion after that, and turns out to be one of the greatest people in the business.
Ted Woloshyn returns in a moment.
I've had the great fortune to say that I've been associated with one of Toronto's finest names in men's clothing for more than 25 years. Tom's Place. Founded by Tom Mahalick's father in 1958, Tom's Place offers brand name men's apparel at unbeatable prices. But more than that, they boast a long-serving, knowledgeable, and friendly staff that can assist you whether you're looking for casual or formal attire. And they have plenty of first-class tailors on site. In addition, Tom and his family are well known for their philanthropic work. So if you're looking to deal with great people who can fulfill your clothing desires at outstanding prices, do yourself a favor and visit Tom's Place. They're open weekdays from 11 to 6, Saturdays 10 to 5, and Sundays noon to 5. You'll find Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Or check them out online at toms-place.com. Tom's Place will suit you.
Now back to Ted Woloshyn.
You do two episodes on a two-parter, I should say, on Monty Python. And boy, what a tough task and what a hill they had to climb to get to where they got.
No kidding. We loved that two-part episode.
Yeah, we did.
Because we love Monty Python. That was such a fun one. So in our show, we So we co-host the show because we have it sort of divided into two parts. So my part was sort of the chronology of the rejections of the events, and then Terry comes in at the end to extract the insight from that episode that you can tuck into your back pocket for a rainy day. And we always have a lot of discussions about what that insight is. It's unique. We have themes that run through, but it's really unique to every episode, which we love, because if you're going through something of your own, chances are you'll find a story that really resonates and mimics what you're going through.
That was just, if I can interrupt there, that was one of the interesting epiphanies for us in this series, was we wondered if it would always be, they would succeed for the same reason.
Right.
That the insight would always be similar. And after 6 seasons, almost every show has got a slightly different take on that insight.
Yeah, totally. And
What
for
al-
Monty,
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. For Monty Python, the insight was find a way, if you can, to laugh at rejection, because the Pythons found it hilarious. You know, if a woman came up to them on the street and hit them with her handbag and said, I hate you lots, I think it was,
Yeah.
They just found it so funny. And that is what carried them through. You know, BBC really didn't like their scripts and their name. And, you know, of course, they had to make the leap to America, which is a different sensibility, a different sense of humor. That was a huge hurt. And they found a way to laugh the whole way through.
Yeah.
And that we hadn't really seen before.
because it's hard to laugh at rejection, but they just took it in stride.
I wonder sometimes about people who decide to take upon the task of becoming an actor, and think to themselves, okay, well, you know, I believe that I could be a great actor, a great leading man, a great leading woman. And they go after part after part after part, and they never get the lead part. They only get a secondary part. And they get a part of a character, and that keeps happening and happening and happening and happening, to the point where they think to themselves, well, you know what, I'm never going to be a star. And I look back on some of these actors. I wish I could remember their names offhand right now, but there are some. Bea Benaderet is one of them. She was in the Jack Benny show. She was on Petticoat Junction. She was on like 4 or 5. She was never the star of any of these shows per se, but she did really well for herself. What a career when you look at it and you amass it all together and you say, okay, well, would you put her up in the pedestal? Was she a superstar? Well, I think if you can sustain a career that long through so many successful shows, you damn right you're a superstar, even if you never starred in any of those programs.
Yeah.
So true. And they're so vital and critical to the storyline or the storytelling.
Yeah.
You think of people like, even though Kevin Bacon, for example, does star occasionally, he's more of a character guy, and he can go from good guy to like serial killer. He's got probably the more fulfilling career than somebody who's always an action guy.
Right, pigeonholed.
Yeah, that's very true. Ellen DeGeneres is another interesting story, because here's a woman who sexuality was the biggest stumbling block for her after she had already reached a level of success. She had her own program and decided, no, I'm coming out. And knowing that was going to kill her career, still went ahead with it anyway.
Yeah, that was quite the story. That was a two-parter for sure. I mean, interestingly, Terry had worked with Ellen back in the day.
Yeah, just a very quick story. I was doing a Big Labatt Blue radio campaign, and I decided to cast it in Los Angeles because all the comedic actors in Toronto were all tied up with other brands. And I needed some really funny people. So I did a casting in LA. I had a role for a early 20s comedic female. The casting tape came in. I listened to like probably 50 actresses, and one was hilarious. Just nailed the part, made me laugh every time I listened to it. I go down to Los Angeles. I get all the actors in the room, and that young girl was so shy. She would just she was like a little mouse, and she would back into the corner. And then when it was her time to deliver a line, she'd walk up to her mic, deliver it, then recede back into the wallpaper. And it was Ellen DeGeneres.
Wow. So she attained a level of success, basically buried herself by coming out, and bounced back and succeeded at an even higher level, but then kind of went out on a negative point where people were pointing fingers at her and thinking, is that a rejection without being a letter of rejection? I suppose it is.
I think it's a form of rejection.
I do too.
I think she faced a lot of online bullying as well, which is just countless people able to tell you exactly what they think right in your comments. I mean, if that's not rejection, I don't know what is. Her story is really something. I think she's left the States now. I think she's gone to live a quiet life in the Cotswolds. So, yeah, she's been through it. And she said, I think, at one point that don't ever hinge your career on being the nice one, right? Her whole ethos was be nice to everybody. I think she said something very similar to that at the end of every episode. Be kind. I think, when it turned out there was some questionable things happening behind closed doors, she said that came back to bite her. So it's a very interesting story.
The story of Netflix is another fascinating story that I'm thinking, Terry, this could have fallen under the auspices of Under the Influence just as easily as this program. And the one statistic that really blew me away was when I thought that, being somebody who used to rent from Blockbuster and was constantly paying late fees, that at one point they had amassed $800 million in late fees. Am I right? Is that figure correct?
I think that sounds right.
Yeah.
That was a few seasons ago, but I think that sounds right. It's wild.
My God, that's a business unto itself.
It is.
Right? It's like, how do you make your money? Just because people are lazy.
Yeah.
You know what? I think that was probably a business strategy. It wasn't that they fell into that money. They figured, okay, we know human nature. People are going to be late, so let's give them a small late fee and we'll play the volume game.
Yeah, and Netflix coming in with a completely different business model wouldn't account for that at all.
Yeah.
There's no late fee with Netflix, so they would be losing that big chunk.
Yeah.
You take a lot of correspondence. You're in touch with your audience, which I think is a great thing quite often, and inviting them to touch base with you. You must receive a lot of inspiring words from people who say, after listening to this episode, or after listening to a number of episodes, or listening to your program over the years, I had faced so much rejection that I was ready to give up, and something hit me and it inspired me, and now I've gone on from this to that. And they may not be superstars, they may not be household names, but they've succeeded in their own right, and that's got to make you feel real.
It's amazing. It's become our favorite part of doing this show, and something I didn't really anticipate when we started. But now, every season we do an annual listener rejections episode where people write in, they leave voicemails for us so we can hear their voices. As well as we do, podcasting is a very solitary pursuit in some ways, and so
you don't see your audience.
And so to actually get to connect with them in that way is amazing. We had some pretty special stories. We just dropped this season's listener rejection stories, and we had a man in the military who was rejected repeatedly to be deployed to Afghanistan and took that very personally and very hard, and for many years he wanted to go. He wanted to serve, and he watched his peers head off to Afghanistan without him, and he had a very difficult time with that. But what he said to us was that when he stayed behind, he got a little bit older. And when he got a little bit older, he got a little bit wiser, and he became a better leader. And when he eventually did deploy, he said, "I'm so glad that I didn't go then and that I went now with all the knowledge I've gained." And I never thought I would have been saying that back when I was so devastated.
What was his great line? He had a great line. Do you remember?
He said, "Rejection is preparing us, not punishing us," is what he came to. And I thought, well, you just summarized our whole series.
I know.
Yeah, we could just close up right now. It was amazing. To gain that kind of insight takes, it takes some struggle and some devastation.
You talk about there's no such thing called success without failure. And I think that to be true. Sometimes it's massive failure. Sometimes it's just falling into pothole after pothole after pothole, and then eventually reaching what you consider to be a finish line or the finish line. But when it starts dealing with your psyche, that's a different situation. Have you spoken to anybody do psychiatrists or psychologists speak to you ever about your programs and the kind of patients that they've had and what they've experienced and how the kinds of depressions that failure and rejection can have on somebody?
We haven't really plumbed that per se. Like, we have not talked to psychologists or psychiatrists about that, but that's an interesting thing, Ted, because that kind of rejection can really affect people in such a way that they could go into a depression, they could go into a black hole. I'm sure there's lots of psychological damage with rejections. I mean, we see it. We don't, we don't plummet, but we see it.
Yeah, we've seen, the word depressed has come up countless times in our scripts. What we have seen that I find really interesting, and I think it's only been 1 or 2 times, is someone who amazingly can summon perspective in the moment. It's really hard. You think, you're meeting wall after wall, you may be depressed, and you can't really summon that perspective in the moment. That's often where the champion comes in, because you got to outsource that kind of energy when you're really down. But once in a while, we come across someone who can do it. In our Canva episode, the founder, Melanie Perkins, who founded Canva, which is, of course, an amazing online design software, she was really depressed. So she had flown from Australia to Silicon Valley to pitch her company to investors. And she was met with 300 rejections. She'd run out of money. She was staying on a couch. Her tourist visa was up. She had to fly back. And somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, she started writing a letter to herself. And this has stayed with me and will stay with me. And it basically said, you're going through a hard time and you're going to launch your company. You're going to find investors. They will be well worth the wait because they'll be the right people. And remember this about yourself. You love a challenge. You're in the challenge now. Stick with it. And she tucked that letter into her back pocket. And I always thought, wow, to be able to come up with that in the trenches is really unheard of in our show. And actually, Jim Carrey did the same thing. He was staring at a bassinet on the floor of a bachelor apartment in LA, and he was just absolutely struggling. And he pulled out a check, wrote a check to himself for $10 million for acting services rendered, dated 5 years away.
And he made that.
And he made it, and he kept it, and he put it in his wallet, and he said that every year he watched it deteriorate just a little bit in his wallet. 5 years away, he was able to cash that check he wrote to himself. It's really amazing. It's inspiring.
It's interesting because it seems that when you talk about people's initial failure, they are propelled by one of two things, and we've touched on this briefly, either by somebody who has aggravated them to the point where it's like, I'll show you, or it's someone who is a mentor who says, no, you can still do it. And I don't know if sometimes if one is more powerful and one is more effective than the other. I think most of us would rather go through life with a mentor than somebody that we're trying to show up. Which do you think is more, in all the research that you've done and all the topics and the individuals that you've covered, which do you think has been more prominent and more profound?
I'd be interested in your answer to this. I'm inclined to think it depends on your personality. Like, one won't resonate with you over the other. Like, for myself, when I talked earlier about being stubborn, I'm very stubborn. I've been told my whole life that I'm very stubborn. So I think the rejection as fuel for me, if someone tells me no, I'm so inclined, and Terry's the same way. I think we share that energy. We're inclined to prove them wrong anyway. But for some people, that really, does not land for them at all, and they'd be more inclined to go that sort of gentle, the net beneath them feels strong enough that they can jump. I think that's personality dependent.
Even in my own story, when I was telling you earlier about that boss I had, Ted, that said I wouldn't go anywhere, and that I wasn't good enough to be an ad writer in Toronto at big agencies. My next job that I managed to land was my mentor. It turned out to be my mentor, where he loved my writing, and he taught me how to think big and how to present ideas. And it was I went from sort of feeling like I was no good to somebody who said, I love what you're doing and I'm going to help you even be better. And he became my mentor. So there you go.
But then you were also told to when you left a major agency because you wanted to focus in on audio for radio commercials specifically, and said, I'm building an agency that's going to be constructing radio commercials only. And your boss said, you're out of your mind. This isn't going to work. You can't sustain.
He did. That's a true story. The president of the agency I was leaving pulled me aside at my going away party and said, "I'm worried about you because you can't make a living only doing radio."
At your going away party, that's kind of perfect.
Yeah. But you know what? I mean, Malcolm Gladwell has that great thought, Ted, that, most people think that entrepreneurs have tolerance for risk. That's what separates them from everybody else. But what Malcolm Gladwell says, which I subscribe to because I think it reflects me, was when you have an idea, you think you believe 100% it's going to work.
Right.
It's not the risk. You're just so convinced your idea will work. And that's what drives you. And that was my point. I really felt that there wasn't a great audio production company in Canada that treated radio like television, cast it in LA and New York and Vancouver. And we created beautiful studios with those and little catering instead of like a basement in the bottom of a skyscraper.
Yeah.
I just lived to become better.
This was the birth of pirate radio.
Yeah. 1990.
Yeah, which was a very fitting title because it was like, I'm taking you in a different direction. If you don't like it, don't jump on board. If you're interested, come on board. Yeah. Are there people? What are we going to see in the next season? I mean, you're on CBC right now, and you're available on podcasts as well. But who are you working on next year? Can you give us a bit of a taste?
Yeah, so for our CBC season, for example, we got to pick our 10 favorite episodes, which was really fun because we've done over 100 episodes in 6 seasons now. So we got to really whittle it down and have conversations that maybe we've never even had. Like, what are our favorite episodes? What stories resonated with us most? So we'll be telling the story of Alanis Morissette, which is one of my very favorites. Stephen King, Lisa Kudrow, who's got a great story. One that just aired, which is, going to come back around, is 5'3" NBA player Muggsy Bogues.
It was over at everything going against him.
Everything. Muggsy Bogues and I are the same height, and if I imagine myself on a basketball court, it's pretty outrageous.
Well, first of all, for a guy to be named Muggsy, who's 5'3", it doesn't fit.
Interesting story with Muggsy.
Though, right? Yeah.
So Muggsy's name is Tyrone Bogues, but when he was, on the streets of Baltimore playing pickup games with much taller peers, what he would do is go low. The old adage, when they go low, you go high. For Muggsy, it was the opposite. Muggsy went low because that's where the ball was. And he would steal the ball away so effectively, he was mugging his opponents. And so they gave him the nickname Muggsy. He didn't love it at first. He thought, I sound like a bit of a criminal.
Yeah.
And then he realized it was the ultimate compliment and blessing from his peers that he had a role on that court.
Because only 20% of the game is at the hoop, right?
Yeah.
80% of basketball's on the ground, on the floor.
When you think about it, I'm a sports fan somewhat, and when you think about how many players were rejected in basketball and baseball and then the various more U.S. centric sports because of their color, and who had to come here. Jackie Robinson was a perfect example, broken into the majors on a AAA and playing for Montreal. There's one example. There's so many different quarterbacks who couldn't play in the NFL because the NFL would not hire black quarterbacks because they did not think that black people were smart enough to quarterback a team.
Wasn't Warren Moon one of those guys?
Warren Moon was one of those guys. Yes, he was. And Warren Moon is in the CFL Hall of Fame, and Warren Moon is also in the Hall of Fame, in the Football Hall of Fame. And Warren Moon won a Super Bowl, and Warren Moon won a Grey Cup championship or two.
Yeah, I know.
So to be rejected because somebody doesn't think you have the talent is one thing, but to be rejected because you're the wrong color, or as we had mentioned, or the wrong hair color, or the wrong religion for that matter, or gender, and I'm sure that happened, and still to this day does happen. And you think to yourself, what am I going to do? I can't pretend that I'm white.
Yeah, and I also think it forces you to carry the weight of your gender, your ethnicity on your shoulders, because now you have to succeed to prove that, women can run the Boston Marathon. That was one of my very favorite episodes that we'll be doing on CBC soon. There were 2 pioneer female runners in the Boston Marathon, which was for
because women weren't allowed back then, right?
70 years. It was
That's
a
right.
men's only event. And,
Well, didn't a woman sneak into it and she was caught and beaten on the
They
streets of
tried to
Boston?
pull her down, and they literally tried to pull her to the ground so she could stop running.
Yeah, they tried to pull her right off the race. That was Catherine Switzer, who became the first official woman to ever run the Boston Marathon. But before Catherine was Bobby Gibb, who ran unofficially and sort of snuck in and crossed the finish line. But of course, once the Boston Athletics Association found out about that, they were quick to nip any sneaking female runners onto the course right in the bud. But the following year, Catherine Switzer, she registered. She actually looked at the application and realized that it didn't actually say anywhere technically you had to be a male runner. So Catherine, she registered under K Switzer so that nobody knew. But she thought they were crazed spectators who were grabbing her. Turns out it was the race director who was on the course trying to pull her right off. It's quite the story. And she said to herself while she was running, if I don't finish, if I don't find the courage to keep running despite the cameras, the race director, all the people watching, that she thought that women wouldn't believe they could do it.
Yeah.
She would be called a publicity stunt. Men would say, there you go, see, she didn't finish. So she was carrying the weight of her gender.
Did either of you ever save your letters of rejection?
I have, those 60 that I talked about earlier. I have them in my office with an elastic band around them.
I went through, after I knew I was going to be chatting with the two of you, I went through my box of stuff that you only go through whenever you move, usually.
Right.
And I looked and I went, look at all these radio stations that turned me down. And I looked.
Did you save those? That's great.
I did. Not all of them, but I've got a good 7 or 8 of them. And there were much more than that. And I remember one of the first radio stations that I applied to was in either Blind River or Smiths Falls. That I don't have, unfortunately, that letter, but I recall the letter. And it was like a form letter telling me that I needed minimum 2 years experience before they would consider me. And I'm thinking,
how do I get that experience?
Where do I work for 2 years but before I'm good enough for Smiths Falls? Where am I going, to a cave somewhere?
I know.
Yeah.
But I saved them. They brought me tears. I tell you, honest to God, I remember one time I talked to my father and broke down. Because I said, look at this.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the first one, and there's going to be many more. And he looked at me, there will be many more.
I know. A lot of the people who rejected me early in my career became friends of mine later in my career. And one of the great creative directors who's now retired, who rejected me back then, he helps me out with my show. He tells me great stories. And one day when we were doing this, I held up the letter. I said, do you remember this? And he went, my God, he had no idea he rejected me. No, because I was a nobody. And I said, yep, you rejected me too.
Wow. Yeah. So Ted, then how did you feel rereading them?
Recently, like in the last couple of weeks, they made me smile. And they made me laugh. And some of the people I know them and they're colleagues of mine, and I ended up working with them or for them or against them, or whatever in the market. And I keep saying to myself, well, geez, I got to pick up this letter and have lunch with that person. Go, here, read this, and then pick up the tab.
Right on.
That's amazing.
Because you deserve to do
the
that.
Radio business, there's a lot of rejection in the radio business too. I mean, I read broadcast dialogue every week, and the amount of movement in the radio business is
now it's I feel so bad. I mean, it's an industry that I worked in radio for 50 years and loved it. Not every minute. That would be a lie. But I loved it for the most part, and I'm so saddened just to see what's happened to it, that it's just been taken over by bean counters. And it's just...
And a lot of companies that don't know a lot about radio, right? Now own radios.
Well, all due respect to Bell and Rogers, yeah, they don't. They're telecommunications corporations, and that's where they should stay. And I think that they're even realizing that as they're starting to bail out on their own. I know.
Those poor people all get rejected and thrown out of work. It's tough.
That's why God invented podcasts, Terry. It's for people who are even too ugly for radio.
I'll be stealing that line.
I love that.
You help yourself. I can't tell you how much fun this has been chatting with you, and I enjoy both of your podcasts and all the great stuff that comes out of the Apostrophe Podcast Company. We regret to inform you the Rejection podcast can be heard on CBC Radio and Sirius XM on Wednesday at 11:30 in the morning, Friday at 4 p.m. on Sirius, Sunday at 7 p.m. CBC and Sirius. Terry, when are you back for your from your?
We have a summer series playing now, Ted, where we pick the best shows from the previous season, repeated.
Right.
And then we're back on the air first Thursday in January.
Mm-hmm. And when can we see the next episodes of We Regret to Inform You?
We're on a little bit of summer break right now while we have the CBC season playing, but we'll be dropping mini episodes throughout the summer, and those should be coming out in a week or two. We've got some good ones coming up. So
the Rue McClanahan one. I heard that one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought that was a great idea. Yeah. And poor Howie Mandel can't pronounce McClanahan.
I know. It was like perfect. Like after everything she went through, she finally gets her Emmy.
I know.
And it's Callahan. It's just the episode writes itself, I think.
I know exactly. I finally made it. Not really.
Yeah, humbled once more.
Yeah. It's great stuff. Thank you so much. I do appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you all very much. We'll talk to you soon. That's going to do it for another episode. Don't forget to check out our past episodes after you listen to, of course, their work, and then you can listen to mine. Very nice I was just handing it over to you first. You can do so by going to www.tedwoloshyn.ca and check out the past episodes, and we're on YouTube now as well. And don't forget, while you're online, fill out your organ and tissue donation card. You could change or even save a life. Have a great week.
The Ted Woloshyn podcast has been brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. For more on this podcast and our sponsors, and to talk to Ted, go to www.tedwoloshyn.ca.